This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host Kurt North, and today we have with me two patrons, Luke Winch and Caredwen Foley. How are we both doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Doing very well. This
is your first time on the Xcast, I believe. I'll start with Luke first. How have you come about the Xcast in general? How did you come about the show?
The magical world of Twitter was how I found out about you guys. I can't remember exactly what happened, but the name was floating around, and so I started to listening to I think it was when season 11 had just started, and I kind of found it and started to listen to the podcasts.
Yeah, good stuff. What about you, Caredwen?
Similar. I was looking for commentary about the revival, particularly at the beginning of season 11, and I'm a big podcast listener in general, but I had been listening to Kumail Nanjiani's podcast a couple years ago, but was sort of sad that had gone on hiatus, and so I went looking for my fix, and have very happily found it with the Xcast.
And obviously you liked it so much that you became patrons, and this is obviously our Roundtable patron podcast. So we are going to be talking in a few moments' time about 3 episodes, which have been reevaluated over the course of time, so that's going to be really interesting. But before we do that, before we get into today's topic, how did you guys come about the X-Files originally? When did you first see the show? We'll start with you, Caredwen.
So I will talk about this a little bit more, actually, in the context of one of my episodes, but my first exposure to the X-Files was when I was, I think, 8 or 9. My older sister had a high school teacher who lent her a couple of just home recorded videotapes of X-Files episodes. And my sister was probably, 15 or 16 then, and brought them home and was watching them. And I watched them with her and was just overwhelmed by how much I immediately loved it. But we actually didn't have cable or satellite in those days, so we just had like 5 television channels, and Fox was not one of them. So it was a long time before I got to watch more episodes. And finally it kind of came out in syndication, and our television signal wasn't very good, so I would actually, like, we had this coat hanger we wrapped in tinfoil that we would hold up against the antenna cable in order to watch the episodes better. So I didn't really properly get caught up until high school and college, but I had been deeply obsessed with the show for many years by then. So now I can, enjoy it on Amazon and DVD and things like that, but it was a long, long struggle.
So you know, obviously Mulder's problem with the TV in that episode when he's trying to get the signals.
Yeah, that point in home, like that, just picture a child doing exactly what Mulder is doing in that scene, and you've got it.
What about yourself, Luke?
I discovered it on its original run in the UK. I think on BBC Two. I think it was.
Yeah, it was BBC Two.
Yeah, and I think I must have been 14 or 15, and I remember watching it with my mum and thinking, I remember watching the pilot and thinking, this is absolutely incredible. And I was quite an impressionable teenager anyway, and I'd already got into like conspiracy theories and UFOs and stuff. So yeah, I was pulled in immediately, and then I think I lost track of it in season 5 or 6 because I turned 18 and I went to London, and life got pretty hectic, so I kind of lost connection, and then just started watching it on DVDs instead.
Did you ever get the X Factor magazine then, seeing that you're into UFOs and things like that?
I did, yes. Come across that? I'm embarrassed to say that I had quite a collection. I don't anymore, but I did have quite a collection of it.
Yeah, it was the X Factor magazine was particularly a weekly magazine they used to collect and have about, well, there must have been like 200 issues of it or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, it was. I'm with you with the humble apology for potentially reading those magazines. So that's all good. Okay, so we'll jump into our discussion about the roundtable, which today is about reevaluating the X-Files. So, Luke, how did you go about choosing your episodes? What approaches have you taken with this, and did you find it? How did you find it? Was it difficult for you, or?
I did find it quite difficult because generally I kind of like all the episodes, bar a couple. When I first thought about it, I thought, well, I haven't really changed my opinion that much of episodes, and then when I started to think about certain ones, and then I started to think about where I am in my life now and what I'm doing now and the experiences I've had, and I rewatched a couple of episodes, and I did start thinking about them differently, particularly the themes of the episode. I really took notice of, and also I'm a bit of a behind the scenes buff, so watching directorial choices and stuff like that was also kind of affected my choices of episodes.
Yeah, I agree that it was a pretty difficult process. For the episodes that I chose, I had to think about episodes to which I had a pretty early exposure. And so I was thinking back to some of the first experiences I had with the show, and, many of those tended to be early season episodes. So I've got, I think I've got one from season 2 and 2 from season 3, maybe. But yeah, I think that that helped me sort of refine my reevaluations a bit by thinking about how I looked at these when I saw them when I was young. I will say the episodes that I saw for the first time as a teenager or a young adult, I think I've reevaluated fewer of those. So I think a big part of it for me was just kind of the chronology and when I encountered them.
I've had an absolute disaster of a time thinking about this. It's been really difficult, and even just behind the scenes that I was sending these two a message on Skype about 20 minutes ago saying that I still hadn't chosen 3. So it has been really difficult. There probably has been over the years. There's probably has been some that I have reevaluated, but it's difficult reminding myself what I've done. I have managed to choose 3. One may be an interesting choice, and it might not stand up to argument, but we'll soon find out. But it is difficult for me. I even tried, and I will name drop one episode. I don't know if it's one of your 3, but one episode that I thought I would be doing, and I watched it last night, and I still struggle with the episode. And it goes back to what you were saying, Caredwen, about themes, that I wanted to revisit Never Again. I've read and heard a lot of people talking about Never Again and how that's changed over the years, and in theory that I thought to myself, well, yeah, I have reevaluated that episode, and in my mindset that episode is going to be fantastic, and it wasn't one that I was instantly grabbed to on any of my rewatches. I've watched them several times, and it's never really stood out for me as an episode. So I put it on last night, and it didn't really stand out for me for an episode. So I can't reevaluate that one. So that's just my throw out one there for anyone who says that, I did try, but I have come up with three options, and we'll see how we go with that.
That's really interesting, Kurt, because Never Again was actually on my kind of honorable mention list too. I didn't end up picking them as a final one, but I did think about it.
Okay, so we shall get into our choices. I think we will go with Luke. Luke, what is your first episode of choice?
Okay, my first episode, I really ummed and ahed about doing this one. So I'm going to reevaluate Wet Wired. It's one I never really used to take much notice of. If I was doing like a rewatch, I'd probably skip it, to be honest. Mainly because I couldn't remember what happened, and I just have this memory of it being not very good. I stuck it on, and what I like about it is the theme of loyalty and trust, and how that can be played on by paranoia. I like the way the subliminal message thing about it, even though it felt quite dated to me, because I think subliminal messages and the old way TV was was done in those days. But I kind of liken the subliminal message to social media platforms and fake news, because there's a really interesting scene with Mr. X and Mulder where Mulder confronts him about what they're going to use this mind control thing for, and who to vote for, and what to do. And it really struck me with all the recent things with Cambridge Analytica and all this huge amount of data that's being used to essentially control the way people vote. So that kind of stuck out for me with that one.
Well, we even this week, I know this is going to go out a bit in quite a bit of time, but this week we had another thing with Facebook, didn't we, with them getting information from messages and stuff on top of the Cambridge stuff as well. Yeah. So
I will say I really enjoy Wet Wired, and I have always really enjoyed it. I hadn't considered it in the context of some of the changes in how we interact with information. In some ways, I think that the sort of fake news and propaganda and changing people's minds, I don't know, it's at the same time more insidious because it's much more targeted now. Whereas when this was aired, we were talking about broadcast television, and these subliminal messages that people were afraid of were being broadcast very, very widely. Whereas here it's more, there's more ability to kind of be more precise in who receives those messages.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I don't know. I guess I also wonder, it's sort of hiding in plain sight in a way for the folks to whom it is targeted, because it's not like many of those sort of messages are a real exercise in subtlety. It's, if you look at any of those examples of how a Facebook feed looks different depending on whether you have kind of more liberal or more conservative viewpoints, the differences are really, really stark. It's just that you don't know the differences are stark because you're only seeing what you are seeing. Whereas for the subliminal messages, like, the idea was that you wouldn't even perceive that anything was different. So I think that's a really, really interesting recontextualization of this, and it makes me wonder how that kind of trust reshaping might function, using different platforms. It would be very, very interesting to see kind of a modern reboot of this episode, or kind of reimagining of it.
So, Luke, when you looked at it in the first time, when you said, you just kind of glossed over it and it didn't really grab you, was there a particular reason why it didn't?
I don't know why, but it has been of lots of years since many years since I've sat down and watched the episode with my full attention. And it's only really in recent years that I've engaged much more heavily with social media. I mean, I've had Facebook for, I can't remember now, 10 years. But because of the communities that I've kind of joined and built up with, especially with Twitter, I think I just thought about it a bit more, and also with the British and American government and everything that's been happening over the past couple of years with that and all the scandals. I don't know why the episode just jumped out at me a bit more.
You're right. It's even though it is dated in the aspects of some of the technology, the VHS videos and stuff like that, that it has highlighted where we are in the world today. So I think that's a great episode choice.
The first episode that I want to talk about was actually the very first episode of the X-Files I saw, and that's Humbug. Now, I don't want to raise anybody's hackles worrying that I didn't like Humbug then or don't like it now. I love it, and obviously it played a pretty substantial role in getting me interested in the series. So my reevaluation of it wasn't about enjoyment. It was more about appreciating different aspects of it. So I think I was 8 or 9 when I first saw Humbug, and I wasn't then, and still I'm not really into kind of classic horror, but I also wasn't easily sort of scared by fiction. So I didn't really get freaked out by things like the funhouse sequence or, Jim Rose hammering a spike into his chest. I just thought it was kind of fun and weird. And that aspect of it, I think, was maybe emphasized by things like Scully eating a cricket with total chill. I was just like, man, this is a cool, weird show, and I want to see more of it. And actually, as a side note, the very next episode I saw that same day was Anasazi. So I was really off to the races in terms of fandom. But for a long time, I think I really had relegated Humbug in my mind to being sort of a fun novelty episode. And a lot of my favorite X-Files episodes to this day are a lot grimmer and a lot less fanciful. So I really like the kind of dark thriller genre of it, and the more potentially realistic, the better. I was just joking with my boyfriend last night about the fact that, I'm not actually all that into the kind of paranormal and alien stuff. Like, it seems like a surprise that this show would be as compelling to me as it is. So, because I really like the serial killer episodes and the human experimentation episodes and parasites and viruses. Give me all that stuff. But I had this kind of sentimental attachment to Humbug. And then I saw it another couple times as a teenager, but I wouldn't say I really thought about it all that much as a story. And then I rewatched it as an adult a few years ago, I think maybe in 2015 or so. And my goodness, I had so thoroughly underestimated it as an episode. It so beautifully subverts your expectations about a monster story. And it humanizes the characters that Scully and Mulder meet, but not in this like kind of scolding after school special kind of way. There's a really nice moment where the sheriff rebukes Scully a little bit for thinking that one of the performers might be the killer. She has this idea that maybe they've like internalized resentment about being looked at differently for their whole life. And she reminds him that, believing that people are equal means believing that they can be capable of doing evil as well. You can't, kind of idealize or put people on a pedestal either. And then Vincent Schiavelli's performance is just so sweet and poignant. I think this episode does a lot of what Clyde Bruckman goes on to do. And just, it's surprisingly heartbreaking. So I really love it for those depths now. And that's something that, I hadn't really grasped when I was a child. Also, when I rewatched it today for this recording, I discovered that there's a wonderful Easter egg in Mulder and Scully Meet the Were-Monster that I had not noticed before. In Humbug, Mr. Nutt, the manager of the trailer park, has a little dog who sits on his desk, and Daggoo in Were-Monster looks exactly like Mr. Nutt's dog. So they did some really excellent canine casting. I think the parallel to Queequeg we've all long noted, but man, that dog looks almost identical.
I've always got fun memories of Humbug, and I love all of Darren Morgan's episodes anyway. But yeah, I love what Caredwen said about it subverts the monster story, and I completely agree with that. There's a great scene that was actually cut out of the episode because it was too long, where they were at, I think, a diner or cafe or restaurant, and they were served by a waiter who would turn his face to the left and be a man, and then he'd turn his face to the other side and it would be a female. I don't think it quite worked, and I think they cut it out for some reason. But yeah, I love that episode, and I love Mr. Nutt and his rant about perceived judgments of people, and then he goes on to say, you're wearing your black suit and your tie, and just basically lays into Molly. It's quite funny.
I am an FBI agent, which is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Humbug. I agree with Darren Morgan in total. I mean, I did a full episode on Jose Chung for Outer Space, which is the reason why I eliminated that from my choice, because I've done an episode on it. Now, the thing about Jose Chung is that it's so layered that you can go into so many different depths, and I think that that's true for a lot of Darren Morgan's work, really. So really, I could have gone down that route, and I didn't. I'm going to kick myself now. I could have gone down any of his episodes. But yeah, I think that he's particularly good at doing things like that. That he's really good at layering his episodes, and a rewatch of his episode 3, 4, 5 times, and you're bound to pick up stuff that you wouldn't pick up before. So I think that's a fantastic choice. Now it's my turn. Okay, so I've gone for an episode which I still don't think is a fantastic episode, is a strongish episode for season 7, and that episode is Chimera. I think it's a typical Monster of the Week. Season 7 for me is a bit tired. It's got a lot of episodes like Rush and those episodes that they are getting tired. And Chimera is one of them where it's a similar thing. It's a Monster of the Week. It's very similar or has themes like Arcadia, I would say. Arcadia is a particular one that I would say it relates to. And the reason why I've chose it for is upon rewatch, I watched it, I would say maybe, I'd say maybe about 9 months ago that I rewatched this. And I don't even know why I rewatched it. But the reason that I chose it was because of some of the directional choices with the use of reflections and use of mirrors within the episode, which I never caught on with in the past, and also some of the characterizations, which was at least trying to do something different. Now, the characterization of which could have gone a completely different way with the lady who actually is doing the killing, who's turning into the monster, where she's got anger inside her and she's bottling it up, and the husband is cheating on her with 2 different women. You've also got the things within that episode where she has kept hold of him. She didn't want to lose a divorce, and he wanted a divorce a few years back, and he was trapped by her by having the baby and things. I think for me, that episode is, as I say, still not the best, but it does try and do quite a few different things and tries to make the characters more 3-dimensional. So
yeah, I think that's such a great choice. I think Chimera might have been one that I hadn't seen until I was an adult, and I really enjoyed that episode. I also watched it over the winter, and I think it was because Familiar reminded me so much of it.
A lot of it has been, when you look at things critically as well, that it's something I wouldn't have noticed before, especially some of the reflection ideas, even without the monster being in the reflection. There's bits where mold has been reflected, or she's obviously looking in the bathwater at one point and she sees the reflection before she lets Mulder go. But there's loads of those little things that are dealing with reflections, and the direction and the way that it ramps up, I think, is really good.
I don't remember specifics about it, but I do remember it having a similar kind of theme to Arcadia as well. And I always say that Arcadia is the non-comedy version of The Burbs.
Okay, so we are going back to Luke on your second episode.
My second episode is The Field Where I Died.
Right.
Now, this is one I've always liked. I've always liked this one. I think my reevaluation is twofold. One is the kind of theme of death and loss countered with extremism, which I've only kind of thought about in the past few years, and also this idea of souls kind of travelling through time, through different generations of people. I find that really fascinating, and shout out to Kirsten Clegg, who I think is absolutely brilliant in this episode. Her different characters are very, very compelling, I think. I know that there was quite a few reviews that thought maybe she was over-egging the pudding, but I don't think so at all, especially after seeing James McAvoy in Split. I kind of compared that as well when I watched it recently. And yeah, I just think this whole notion of Mulder realising that, slowly realising through the episode that he has basically been with this woman Melissa through the ages. Weirdly enough, I did a short course, online free course, on the American Civil War a couple of months back, and there's a character. Well, not character. There was a soldier called Sullivan Below, who Morgan and One kind of based the character of the soldier that Mulder was in the Civil War. And there's a very famous letter he wrote to his wife, and there's a section in it which pretty much encompasses the whole episode for me, which is, "Do not mourn me dead, think I'm gone, and wait for me, for we shall meet again." And for me, that's the entire crux of the episode. And again, that's, it made me rethink about the episode very differently, actually, to what I've previously done.
you may well hear those words again in The Field Where I Died, because I covered The Field Where I Died.
Oh, did you?
So yes, so you may well hear that letter again. What about yourself, Caredwen? What did you think of The Field Where I Died, and have you had a chance to review it over the years? I think personally for me, the interesting one, which I never factored in, was the backlash with the MSR side of things. I don't know about yourself, but what did you think over various rewatches over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't say The Field Where I Died has ever been one of my favorite episodes, but I think it's an interesting episode, and I think it... One thing that I find really gripping about it, and something that I didn't sort of fully appreciate when I was younger, and that really kind of gets me now, is that they lose so badly in the ending. You know, this entire colony kind of dies. All these children, everybody dies, and you're not accustomed to seeing your protagonists lose that badly, that tragically in at the end of a television show. So I think that choice, just the complete concession to disaster and tragedy, I have a lot of respect for, and I think is a really interesting, smart, dramatic choice for the end of the episode. I think the performances are good. I think David Duchovny is brilliant in this episode. It's just gripping and heartrending. I don't know. I think that maybe my hesitation about this episode is a little bit around. I'm like kind of a. My beef with the X-Files is always about continuity. I'm like one of those people. So it always kind of bothered me that this relationship is shown to be so critical for Mulder, and so, embedded in his consciousness at a really deep level. And we talk about it in this one episode, and we never talk about it again. So that's something that always feels like a bit of a, I don't know, it sort of feels like a departure from the rest of the series a little bit in that way. So that's something that keeps me from kind of being enjoying it fully. But yeah, I mean, I think it definitely thinking about, those, I don't remember how many hundreds or whatever of people who belong to this cult who die at the end. I don't think I realized when I was younger just what an extreme choice it was for the show to go that route. And as an adult, having watched a whole lot more television and seen a whole lot more examples of the protagonists execute a stunning rescue at the end, what a bold choice.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm a huge Millennium fan, and there's episodes in Millennium where it ends on a bleak note, and I think TV doesn't have to be a rounded end, finish it perfectly type of TV show. You can have tragic endings, and you can have endings which are really powerful, even though you don't maybe get resolution. But the whole point is to tell that story, and I think that The Field Where I Died, it kind of does that, and that's why it's so different. It's also something that when I've revisited, I've loved this episode since I first watched it. I was big into things like Heaven's Gate, which happened just around the time of this airing, as it happens in the UK. It was only this had aired, I think I mentioned this in the podcast, but this aired, I think it was in the February of 97, and Heaven's Gate happened 2 or 3 months later. So that was really kind of a cacophony of things happening at the time, and obviously Millennium came out around the time The Field Where I Died came out as well. So this cacophony of stuff that was happening around that time really had an effect on me, especially with the cult side of things. And the cults on this episode are kept in the background to a degree as well. You really have to think about it before you really get into the episode, because it's focusing so much on Kristen and David's performance as Mulder and what's her name?
Melissa Riedel.
I can't remember. Melissa, yes. So it's focusing so much on them that you forget about the actual tragedy that's happened, with these people who are dying because of this David Koresh type character who's basically what the characters actually, Vernon and Ephesians, actually based on. I think that David Koresh's name, if I remember rightly, is actually Vernon. So there's a lot of things that's within this episode which I've revisited over the years, which are worth revisiting. And I think this is definitely an episode which, if anyone is just focused on, say, the Mulder and Scully dynamic and why has this Melissa become the soulmate, as some people don't like the episode for, there is other things to view in the episode, and I think that's definitely worth looking into.
A thing that I also, it's always just gone over my head and completely missed it, is the whole child abuse thing going on as well within the cult, which is why Scully thinks that she might be schizophrenic, and her different personalities are triggered any time the conversation turns to that child abuse.
I think if you were going to reevaluate it, it's definitely worth thinking some of these things that you've said. The child abuse thing, especially, is quite harrowing, and it's as I said before, it's a hard watch. If you watch The Wild and the Innocent by Millennium or The Well-Worn Lock or something like that, they are really hard episodes to watch, but they are worth it. Caredwen, your second choice, isn't it?
All right, so my second episode is Too Shy. For a long time, I had really disliked Too Shy. I think I thought of it as sort of a moral panic episode. Online dating is scary. The internet is dangerous. Vulnerable, lonely hearts get preyed on. And I think this episode definitely has a lot of problems. And I think it suffers a lot from being obviously extremely dated. I watched it last night and I took a couple of notes on it and was just... the scene where they talk about putting out a localized online alert. There are a couple of moments in it that are completely laughable. But I actually think the central message is good, because I think this episode really reinforces the idea that danger comes from inside. There's a really long tradition of women being told to fear the unfamiliar, to be afraid of strangers in dark alleys and things like that. But most of us who are victimized by people we know, by partners or neighbors or friends or family members. These are the people we trust the most, and they're the people we let in. And that is how, humans form bonds and relationships, but it's often also how we suffer. So this idea that danger is something that comes from inside a circle of trust gets signaled a couple times in this episode. Encanto is just as weird and creepy and ultimately dangerous to his landlady that he knows, in real life, as he is to these women that he meets online. And then when he goes to Ellen's place to, apologize / eat her, she locks the door. There's this very slow moment of her pulling the chain across the bar, and he's watching her do it. She's still afraid of somebody getting in. But she's let the danger in already. Being a stranger isn't what makes him dangerous. What makes him dangerous is coming across as trustworthy. And I'm honestly not entirely sure how he does, because Timothy Carhart gives an extraordinarily creepy performance in this, but somehow these women are still... So I think that is one of the... not that his performance is one of the weaker parts of the episode. I think his performance is very good. But I think this episode could have done a little bit more to... play up some of the sweeter, charming moments that win these women over, because I think it leans too hard on their insecurities as the reason that he's successfully able to prey on them. Darren Mooney points out in his review of Too Shy that in the closing sequence, Mulder looks out the open window and sees somebody running outside, and he goes off to play action hero, only to find that he's actually been, chasing a teenager with a can of spray paint. And also it says a lot about the times we live in that, 20 years later, a scene of a black teen asking a white guy with a gun not to shoot him still hits really hard. But the killer is still inside the apartment, and the two women that he attacks are the ones who bring him down. Mulder has gotten played by looking outside, just like we do when we feel scared to walk home alone at night, but we trust a friend. And I think that the way the episode kind of reinforces the idea that dangerous people aren't dangerous because you don't know them. They're dangerous, and if they enter into that circle of trust, they have an opportunity to harm you. being vigilant and being attentive to the danger inside the deadbolt is important. So I think that episode is actually a little more thoughtful than I maybe gave it credit for, and isn't quite as hard on the concept of the internet and online dating and things like that as maybe it looks at first blush.
Yeah, I mean, you've only got to look at the world that we live in now, and we were talking about there the circle of trust, about bringing people in. That in that episode, from what I remember, that you've got someone saying, you're on that dating site, you don't even know him, etc., 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 and you've got to build this circle of trust up. I would flip that on its side now, and if you look at the way that the culture is nowadays, that you've only got to swipe right or left, and away you go, and and there is literal strangers meeting up and doing all kinds of things, but that is a completely different way to where we were 20, 30 years ago. And I think that's an interesting flip, because obviously what you're looking at, what that episode is saying is about, people within your circle of trust, where we don't, at some point in certain people's lives, they don't even consider their safety in that way. That it's just the way that technology has moved on so much. So Luke, what did you think of the episode and reevaluating it?
Yeah, I actually didn't watch that too long ago. Pretty much what Caredwen said about danger being within, and who we can trust. And I think also, what's the actor who plays in Canto again?
I think his name's Timothy Carhart.
Yeah, but I agree with you in the fact that he's really creepy, but he's overly creepy. He's kind of OTT with the performance, and I think I agree that in order for you to completely buy that these women want to meet him and think he's a nice chap and all, he could have downplayed that a bit, but yeah, he's mega creepy.
Yeah, especially when he's eating people's fat. I mean, that's kind of a bit creepy.
That's super creepy. Yeah.
I will say, I think that those the effects in this episode are fantastic. I mean, they're not decaying, but the kind of disassociating corpses are just as gross now as they were 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's one of those episodes where I don't dislike it. It's a season 3 episode, so I'm in love with season 3. So it's not one I would say I don't love, because in any other season it would probably be quite highly up there. But it's not one I go back to regularly. But it's certainly an episode which I remember well. So everything that you say, it's still in there in the head, and I can recall details from that episode. And I think it's a fantastic one to do. And I think that you're right, Caredwen, in the aspects of revisiting it from a point of view of, how many times have we seen on news, Sky News and Fox News or wherever it may be, that you've got children that are missing or people that are missing, and it's someone's family that it's actually caused that harm, and they're standing there crying their eyes out on the stand there, and it's actually them who've done something.
So I was just going to go the whole chat room thing. I think nowadays there's an escalation of what it was in that episode of the X-Files, and you hear so many horrible stories now about men impersonating young teenage boys to kind of lure girls in, and it's really horrific, but it's a slight escalation of what Tushar was doing in that episode.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also say that I think this episode does a good job of pointing out that the fact of meeting somebody online doesn't render them more dangerous, though. Although I think it sometimes creates venues that wouldn't have existed before, but prior to the internet, this guy would just have been chatting women up in bars. He was still dangerous to the people around him. It's just that the circle of people to whom he's dangerous has changed, but he always would have been victimizing somebody.
Now you've got my second episode, and it is going to be an interesting one. My Struggle 1.
Silence.
Silence. I've chosen this for a couple of reasons, and there's a wider thing. I could have said all of my struggles, or I could have said season 10 and 11, really, in the whole grasp of things. But the reason why I've looked at my Struggle 1, I remember watching it when it aired, and I quite enjoyed it. It was fine. I was angry when he mentioned about the war and aliens and all that pizzazz, and that not happening, and that really got me angry. And you know, as much as I love the mythology, and this is probably part of it, the fact that I will, to my last breath, try and save the mythology at some point. And I know it's a losing battle, but I will try. So I think on a couple of rewatches that I've done recently, I watched all the struggles back to back, and I think that My Struggle 1 is probably the strongest out of the four of them for me. And I think that on rewatching it, I do kind of understand what Chris Carter was trying to do. I mean, even as early as Deep Throat, he was trying to play with the idea of military complex, and we've got the differences between, obviously, alien abduction and the military complex, and even Scully gets abducted with the military complex, effectively, that we find out when. So we're still playing with that idea, even in likes of Ascension. But it's a very different world that Mulder and Scully live in now with this way that the episode runs. And I've come to appreciate that the episode does try to link I Want to Believe with this episode as well. And it's now the show moved into a more straight-laced pulpy direction. I'm a sucker for monologues to a degree. Now, I'm not talking My Struggle 3 monologue territory. I'm just talking monologues in general. But the conversation with Tal O'Malley works for me, even though the actual idea is wrong. The way I've revisited it is that we're seeing it through kind of Mulder's eyes and Mulder's psyche, and where he would go with that. But there was some form of loose plan, because even at the end, Mulder has a throwaway line. He says something like, there's something called the Venus Syndrome. It's a runaway global warming scenario, bringing about the sixth extinction, and prepared to... and then even these words were said in My Struggle 1. Those with means will prepare to move off the planet into space, which has already been weaponized against the poor huddled masses of humanity, and that have been exterminated by the uber-violent fascist elites. And I think that I understand what Chris Carter was trying to do, and I think it was probably a mistake to go down the route that he did. But the concept of it being us, a man as a person who's going to bring about this destruction, is a good one, but it's just poorly executed. And as much as I'd like to say that My Struggle 1 is a fantastic episode, it isn't. It's an okay episode. I quite like it for what it is. And when you look at the My Struggles in connection with likes of Ghoulie, I think there is a really small string of a line that you can run a mythology through those 5 or 6 episodes.
I'm pretty much in the view that, yes, Chris Carter convoluted yet again the whole conspiracy and the through arc of that. I think Gillian and David haven't really stepped back into their roles as much as we'd like them to. I think that Scully definitely is quite un-Scully-like, and I think Mulder's he's here and there, but I agree with you. I really like when Mulder and O'Malley have their huge monologues in the house. Even though a lot of the information in there is a bit gobbledygook, I just think that scene is very well directed, with the cutting back of real footage of certain things happening. I just thought that was, for me, the strongest scene in the entire episode. Yeah,
and as I say, even though it's wrong, it's playing into all of the fears that that someone from a conspiracy side of things would fear about. 20 years ago it was alien abduction. Now we're talking about sort of the industry, the major industries, and effectively the government's out of it now. It's all about industry as such, and bringing about the banks crashing and all that type of thing, which is a real fear, especially since what happened in 2008. And so this is why I'm saying I think when on reevaluating it, it has its moments. But I can see where he was trying to go with it. I just think the execution wasn't quite there. And one of the things that was said, which I watched this is one of the episodes I watched last night, where I watched the scene where we had Sveta and Mulder talking to each other, and she went, basically, it was men that abducted me, that it was the wrong question. And what I understood from that, and I hadn't really got it in the past, is that no one, any alien abduction person who's, apart from potentially Scully, really, has ever said it was men who had abducted her, that they were using alien technology. This was the first time that Mulder's hearing this directly from an abductee, that, you know, this is what it is. Having said that, there's so much weight behind the previous 9 seasons that it doesn't. There's too much weight for it to even stack up.
Yeah, I also really like the element of the mythology that tries to give a non-paranormal, non-alien oriented explanation. I think I've found that really interesting ever since, those early episodes like 731 and Nisei. I mean, that kind of human experimentation angle has always really, really appealed to me, and the idea that you could sustain a version of the mythology in which this is really about bad government men victimizing people, and you don't necessarily need the alien storyline. I think there are still aspects of the alien kind of aspects of the mythology that I like, but I will say, I mean, I don't particularly like My Struggle 1. I don't particularly like the My Struggles in general, but I think that's kind of interesting as a way of revisiting some of those earlier suggestions in the series, that maybe there was another explanation. I also, that monologue with Tad O'Malley, also I kind of enjoy, because it reminds me a lot of the Michael Krichgau monologue in, I forget if it's in Redux 1 or Redux 2, but where he, you have all those, that kind of B-roll footage of, fighter jets and moon landing and things like that kind of playing over it. And I think that many times this series has had this archetype of somebody who shows up to tell Mulder that he's been wrong. And I just think that's such a cool kind of way of doing that storytelling. Joel McHale is such a sort of strange departure for that type of character. I think Joel McHale is hilarious and a really fun performer to watch. But it's funny how different he is from, what is it? Is John Finn the actor who plays Michael Krichgau? And yeah, I mean, there's such different versions of that archetype, but I think it's that's a helpful way of sustaining the balance of a series that really depends on that kind of believer-skeptic, dichotomy. And sometimes we've seen a lot to give weight to the believer side, and I think sometimes you need something to kind of shift that balance a bit so that there's still a bit of tension there.
It's aiming at the conspiracy theorists that are on YouTube, and it's not hiding away from that at all. In the likes of Krichgau was in a position where he, if not knew all of it, he certainly had enough in his mind's eye that he could formulate what was going on, and he had insider knowledge where McHale's going off bits and scraps, pretty similar to what Mulder would be in this world. If Mulder was born later on, he would be probably more like a Tad O'Malley than he would be himself in some ways.
Okay, my final episode is, I reevaluated this one for a really weird reason. Well, 2 reasons actually. One of the reasons is because I just think Kim Manners blows this one out of the park, because it's just wonderfully crafted, superbly directed, and I just noticed little new kind of things here and there. For instance, all the scenes with Mulder in his waterbed, which I just find hilarious anyway, because that's the waterbed that Maurice Fletcher bought in Dreamland, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. But the first camera shot is from behind the bed when he's trying to put his finger on the leak and it keeps sprouting a new one.
Yeah, so we're talking about Monday here, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Sorry, Monday. Yeah, the first shot is from behind the bed, and then the next Monday, when it springs a leak, the shot is kind of looking up towards the bed, towards where the pillars are, and behind the bed is just a shelf and a wall. So essentially, the first shot was us looking through the wall onto the bed, which I just thought was just a really clever shot. But also, another reason why I've kind of re-looked at this is because at the minute I'm doing a science degree, and I likened Mulder, Scully and the girl Pam as numbers or variables. And if you have a big number like 6.33321, if you change the 2 at the 1 at the end, if you change them to a 5 and a 6, if you round the answer, it will still be the same result. So I kind of see Mulder as the end numbers, which you can kind of change around. You can kind of change those variables around, but still the result is the same. So whatever Pam tries to get Mulder and Scully to do, her boyfriend will still blow up the bank. And what we kind of realise right at the end of the episode is that she really, really believes that Mulder is the variable which will change fate and basically stop Bernard from blowing up the bank, but it actually ends up her death is the variable. So she's the main number. She's the first number, because when you change that first number, you change the whole rounded answer. So I've never looked at it like that before, and the only reason I have is because I've been looking at maths for the past 2 weeks. So I'm just looking at everything like that. So yeah, but I just love the episode. I think the direction is superb. I think David Duchovny really gets to do a bit of comedy acting, particularly in the flat scenes. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, I love Monday. I think it's such an interesting kind of examination of that all that kind of butterfly effect, and I think that Luke, your description of sort of you can change some variables but not other variables, and some of them are contingent on one another. I think is provides a really thoughtful kind of framework for looking at this. It's such a challenge of analysis in general, knowing that some of your independent variables are subject to your control, and some of them are beyond it. And this is an episode where Mulder and Scully, well, Mulder really is just grappling with the recognition at first that, this is, he can only touch the parts of it that he's interacting with, but there is still so much about this situation that is beyond his control. It reminds me a little bit also of, the Goldberg variation, because there's also that kind of sense of all of these different components fit together in an impossibly complex way, and you can only ever see your sort of small part of the puzzle. So I think the more you interact with those kinds of ideas in other contexts, in the context of research or, in science classes or mathematics or things like that, or even just in practice, we experience that a lot in our own lives. But seeing it actually play out Groundhog Day style is very satisfying. I really enjoyed that episode.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful what you said about the mathematics side of things. I mean, that's something that I would love to consider now that I've watched that episode. I mean, I love those type of episodes of TV and movies anyway. I love as you mentioned there, Groundhog Day or Cause and Effect on Star Trek Next Generation, and you've got Heaven Sent in Doctor Who, and those episodes I absolutely adore, because I just love the repetitiveness of it, but I also like some of the direction that you've got, as you mentioned earlier on, the way you can look at a scene and change it ever so slightly with the events that are taken in, and those small minute details compared to the bigger plan. The events still happen. The small minute details don't really matter, and I do love that aspect of those type of episodes. But your mathematics side of things, without a doubt, is definitely worth considering. And I've never thought about it in that way, and that's certainly something I will do in future. What are we going to have for your final one?
My final episode is Grotesque. And the first time I saw Grotesque, I was 10. And I was in the hospital right after an appendectomy. So my earliest impression of this episode was that it was so boring. I couldn't get into it. When I was a kid watching the X-Files, I was really interested in science, and I was sort of interested in the paranormal aspects of the show, but the kind of profiling and the psychological elements were a little esoteric for me. And I saw this episode a couple more times when I was a teenager, and it still kind of left me cold. I didn't really revisit it until probably my mid-20s, and I watched it again then and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think part of the reason for that change was a little bit more exposure to just more of the cultural context around serial killer stories. Like by that point, I had seen, Silence of the Lambs and a lot of other classic films like that. I watched Hannibal while that was on and absolutely loved it. And I think also my appreciation for that kind of psychological storytelling had developed quite a lot. I think this is a really interesting episode about evil, about kind of identity and about the boundaries of oneself and how being exposed to evil can sort of destabilize those boundaries. I am just now, after many years of intending to, digging into Millennium for the first time. And the things that I enjoy about Grotesque are a lot of the things I enjoy about Millennium. And it's making me think that actually if I had tried to start watching Millennium when I was, a teenager or in my early 20s, I might not have appreciated it as much. But I really like that this episode plays with the idea that there could be this literal, tangible evil contagion. But it also gives us the possibility that maybe the nature of evil's contagion is just that it's so painful to be around that exposure to it breaks us in some way. And I also like that it kind of gives us this interesting, genuine mystery to grapple with. Like we might not really fully buy the idea that Mulder has had a full-on Will Graham style breakdown. Although it's, I guess, not impossible because this series does take risks. But we also get the suggestion that maybe Mostow infected Agent Nemhauser, with the evil when he bit him during his arrest. So we're given some red herrings there. But then even in the ending, the revelation that, it's Patterson, maybe he was infected with evil in this way. Or maybe he just went crazy. I think there are very satisfying paranormal and rational explanations for what happened. Second thing about my evaluation of this episode that changed is that I really love the direction now. I had always found the fact that it's shot really dark quite irritating because I was watching it on a probably fuzzy television doing the Mulder in home antenna thing. But watching it now, in HD and paying a lot more attention to the directorial choices. I think the visual language of this episode is so beautiful and dark. It does really interesting things with blue and red lighting in a few different scenes. Actually, another episode that I don't particularly care for, but that does a good job with this is 3. And I think the visual languages of those episodes, I think, have some affinities with each other. And then finally, I mean, Kurtwood Smith is just an inspired piece of casting for Bill Patterson. He's, yet another mean dad figure for Mulder. I mean, God, like this, Kurtwood Smith plays a character in Dead Poets Society who drives his son to suicide. Like, this is a brilliant piece of casting. He gives a great performance. He's really well written because we learn so much about him, not just from what we're told about him, but from the ways we see him behave and from the ways other characters behave around him and things like that. So I think I've come over the years to even more enjoy the performance that he gives and the performance that kind of elicits from the people around him as well. So I love Grotesque. I've really come around on it very, very hard.
Well, that's great news because I absolutely adore Grotesque. It's in my at least top half, maybe top 15 episodes. The thing about Grotesque is and I think from my reevaluation of it over the years has been that I loved it as a psychological thriller anyway. I loved The Silence of the Lambs. I loved Hannibal, like you mentioned. Obviously, that's in recent years, but I love a good psychological thriller. It's come from my mother. Mother was mad into psychological stuff. And even from that aspect, it was different from an X-File, the way that I looked at it. But then over the course of the years, when you realise, as you mentioned, about the biting of the bite, and was he infected or was it part of his psychological profile of what happened to him as he just delved into the monster and became that monster? That it's an unusual episode because there's not often the time where it could be one or the other, and it leaves it at that, whether it could be one or the other. And I really do like it for that reason. And I've come to realise that over the time. I'm a huge Millennium fan. I love Millennium. I have done since day one. And this is just, obviously, this was middle of season 3, I think this was, and this was one of the genesises of what eventually happens in Millennium, that becomes Millennium. That this is obviously a story that will eventually become more millenniumistic as we have in Jose Chung's Doomsday Defense, as he coins that. So so Grotesque is certainly high up there on my list, and even though it's a highly regarded one for me, there is things when I go back and watch it. I mean, one of my finest scenes, which I didn't catch for the first couple of times, is the one where Kurtwood Smith's run in. I think it's in the factory or wherever they are, and you get a glimpse of him, and he's got the evil face. He's got obviously evil makeup on him. I don't know if you've ever caught that, but that is a wonderful piece, and that goes back to my Chimera. Actually, there's scenes in Chimera where she's, if I just jump back to that for a second, that she sees herself in the mirror, and the mirror starts smashing, but you don't see how that mirror smashes. Now, in my head, that is her smashing the mirror, but you're not seeing the actual action, because we're seeing it all in her head, so she's not remembering that she's smashing those glasses. That's another thing that came about from that. So Grotesque and Chimera is kind of linked with me in that way. So I think that having the potential point of view of Kurtwood, seeing him run out like that, I think it was Patterson, wasn't it? Seeing him run out and just seeing that flash of evil that is slowly becoming the monster. You can either see that in the mind's eye of that he has actually become a monster and it's become a supernatural thing, or it's in the eye of the beholder that he has just become evil, and I really like that aspect of it. What do you think, Luke? What are your thoughts on Grotesque?
I mean, Grotesque is one of my top episodes, probably one of the best episodes of season 3. I too am a massive Millennium fan, so I love this exploration into whether evil is introvert or extrovert, and where it comes from, and is it this kind of fluid thing, or is it this seed that we're born with? And I absolutely love that. As you mentioned, Caredwen, the direction is superb. It's another Kim Manners one. I literally think him and Rob are two of the best directors of the whole run of X-Files. I think they're brilliant.
Yeah, totally agree.
It's just a superb episode, and it really is really dark. I mean, I think apart from Home and Irresistible, it's one of the darkest episodes.
Right, okay, so we are at my final episode. This one is, I wouldn't say controversial. It's not controversial in a way, and I think it's more of a personal thing. It's One Breath. Yeah. It's purely because, and this is the one I was contemplating about 10 to 7. We recorded this at 7. We started recording at 7 o'clock. So this is the one that I was really struggling with. But the reason why I've chosen One Breath is for a number of different reasons. One Breath is potentially my second favourite episode of the entire series. It wasn't necessarily always that. The Anasazi trilogy with Anasazi, Blessing Way and Paperclip had always been a massive entrance to me into the X-File mythology. That's where I came into it. And in the UK, I don't know if it was the same over the pond, but in the UK we had a selection of videos, VHS videos, that came out over the course of its run, and the unopened file was that Anasazi section. That was the unopened file was Anasazi, Blessing Way and Paperclip. And Abduction was file 3, file 2 was Tombs, and file 3 was Dwayne Barry, Ascension and One Breath. And so the reason why I've chosen One Breath is because up until, I would say, 4 or 5 years ago, I have never seen One Breath as a single piece of episodic television. I've always seen it as a bigger whole. And the way that I watched that, I always likened in my head, probably wrongly, that it was just the Scully aspect of it with the faith theme and Nurse Owens, until I started to really look at it as just a 44-minute piece of television. And then I realised just how good that episode is. There is so much packed into it. It has everything you could possibly want from a mythology episode, and it is a fantastic hour and 45-minute worth of television. You've got Skinner talking about his Vietnam stuff, and you've got the Scully family being brought into it. You've got Lone Gunman talking about branch DNA and hybridization, and the genesis, the mythology, effectively. That's where it really kicks in, and that's what I'm really invested into. You'd also get Mr. X talking about, he used to be Mulder, and all that kind of worms that opens to what Mr. X could have been in his previous life. The pacing's brilliant. It's a great Mulder episode because he's got to carry it because of Gillian Anderson's pregnancy. That he's got to effectively carry that episode, and Mulder is my favourite character in the piece. You've also got Melissa coming into it as well and creating this, not love triangle, but this triangle between the two Scullys and the differences between them, and how much Melissa tests Mulder in a completely different way to the way that Scully would test him. So for me, the reason why I've chosen, obviously, this, again as well, this is also a template that will go on with Cigarette Smoking Man, the scene with against Mulder and him, and things that would happen and replicate themselves in like some Memento Mori. So I think this is a perfect episode, and I never viewed it like that until recent history when I took it away from Duane Barry and Ascension and watched it just as one 45-minute piece of television.
Yeah, I mean, One Breath is a spectacular work of art. I think what you said a minute ago about Melissa's role in the episode is really interesting to me because you used the word she tests Mulder in a different way than his sister does, and I think that's such an insightful observation. Like there's something missing for Mulder with Scully gone, that he doesn't have somebody to test him, and he doesn't have somebody to keep him in check. And Melissa and Dana Scully couldn't be more different from each other in terms of their own kind of beliefs, but she provides enough of that role, even though it's in such a different way, that she's able to kind of help check some of his impulses around, wanting to seek vengeance and wanting to despair and wanting to be cynical and angry. So I think that's a really interesting episode of The X-Files, that despite, I think there could be a temptation to just kind of see Melissa and Dana Scully as these very, sort of stereotypically opposite characters, in the way that I think we sometimes are tempted to see Scully and Mulder that way. And I think in the way that sort of in the broader cultural discourse, Scully and Mulder are used metaphorically that way a lot. But I think that dynamic does a really nice job of very subtly reminding us there are important commonalities between all three of these people that enable them to communicate with each other and complement each other in ways that sometimes are really necessary for them. It's hard for Mulder to function with Scully gone, and so Melissa provides him with a little bit of what he needs to keep going, just in a very different way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can praise this episode enough, really, can we? It's an incredible 43 minutes of television, and it has two of my favourite ever scenes in it, which is the one you talked about with Skinner, talking about his time in Vietnam, and also the confrontation between Mulder and Smoking Man, which is one of my favourite scenes ever. Just the way, the absolute gall he's got to try and light a cigarette as Mulder's got a gun to his head, and it's just brilliant. And the line, I've watched presidents die. He holds so much power, or the illusion of power, that he tries to kind of hold over Mulder, and Mulder at this point is feeling so helpless. It's such a dynamic scene. It's just brilliant, and the whole episode. And I love the idea of Scully sitting in the boat, and this rope being this thin tether that kind of keeps her in this world. You can almost see it as her soul is kind of drifting away, and she's got to fight to come back. There's so much thematic and symbolism.
That is what a part of my reevaluation was as well, because during watching that VHS when I was younger, I saw that as the weaker part of the episode, the whole boat scene, and I wasn't ready to really delve into the depths of those themes. Now, as years have gone on, I've now looked into that, and I get it as an atheist person, but I get the themes and the story behind it, and I appreciate that, and I have come around to liking that so much. Just curious as well, Luke, did you you said you'd seen the TV show from the beginning. Did you see this in part, or did you see the video? Or
I saw this on TV because I remember 3 coming on the episode before and intensely disliking it for obvious reasons. But apart from the first scene where he basically puts Scully's files into his filing cabinet, which is again quite a dated thing. It's all on computers now, isn't it? So
I have one other thought about this episode, and I'll take this opportunity to offer a small defense of the shipper community. I wouldn't say I identify very strongly as a shipper, in the sense that I don't think I ever cared very much about seeing a romantic relationship between Mulder and Scully depicted on screen. I think that would have really felt like it distracted from what the show was about. But I do think of myself as one to the extent that I really love episodes that drive home the depth of the bond between Mulder and Scully. And I'm happy for that to be a bond of genuine romantic love. I enjoy seeing the kind of platonic connection between them in the early seasons too. Like, I'm super here for it. I'm a shipper in the sense that I care a lot about their relationship. But yeah, I think this episode is just transformative in the sense of that. And this kind of arc in general is really transformative for that, because we have seen these two characters care for each other very much before this, but I think watching just how devastated Mulder is here and how just quietly joyful and restored he is at the very end, and how kind of healing that last scene of them together, when he doesn't have a big speech to give her when she's in her coma. He doesn't have a big speech to give her when she's doing better, but just seeing the restoration and the kind of healing that has taken place says more about the connection between them than I think any classical kind of public display of affection could do. So I really love this episode from that standpoint.
Yeah, as a non-shipper, as many people will already know that I'm not a shipper, I would 100% agree with what you say. I don't think this episode would be as powerful as it could be without having that influence in there. And I'm not adverse to the emotional platonic aspect of it, and you wouldn't get scenes like Mulder in the hospital raging when he's trying to find out what happened to her and things, and it's vital for the show. As I say, I'm not a shipper, but that element of it has to be in there. There has to be a genuine love and a genuine affection and a genuine worry and concern for each of the characters. And I think that One Breath, to me, is probably the strongest that I've seen that over its course of its time. With Memento Mori getting is close. We are at the end of the end of this episode. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming on. It's much appreciated. Where can we find you both online? So we'll start with Caredwen. Where can we find you online, Caredwen?
You can find me often in the XCast Facebook group, or I'm also on Twitter at Caredwen, Caredwen.
Brilliant. And Luke?
You can find me on Twitter at Luke_Winch. I'm also on the Facebook basement page and also in the Patreon.
I've been Kurt North. You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. But until next time, trust no one.
The Xcast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and presented by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated group of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find us on Twitter at The Xcast, and on Facebook if you type in The Xcast, or at our group, X-Files Basement, an Xcast podcast fan group, where you can continue the discussion about all things Mulder and Scully. If you want to support The Xcast further, you can now subscribe and become a patron of the show on Patreon. On Google, just type patreon.com/The Xcast. That's Patreon. You'll see all of our tiers, subscription options and perks, which include early access to episodes, bonus content such as commentaries on X-Files episodes, access to a patron chat zone, and even appearing on one of our Patron Roundtable discussions. We would appreciate any support you can give the show, so just go to patreon.com/thexcast to find out more. Our title music is provided courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.